If you're applying to juried conventions and want an advantage with your application, or just looking to elevate your table display, this video is for you. Hi, I'm Macy, and I'm the artist and designer behind Molokena, a small business focused on kawaii merch. I've done about 41 events as of this recording, and my largest cons have been Anime Expo, Fanime, and Anime Central. Disclaimer, my comments are of my opinion, and I will only be reviewing their display and not necessarily their products or their work. Starting off with Moore's Crates. Love the use of height. I'm assuming you're using 12 by 12 grid cubes just because this seems like a 6-foot table. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So probably 6-foot table, and having your display go up at least 4 grid cubes high is ideal, or at least 4 grid cubes high. It's good that you have your shop name both up here and down here, and I usually recommend having your shop name at least at the 4th grid cube height, just because the average attendee tends to stand at around 3 grid cubes tall. And if there is a crowd at your booth, passerbys won't be able to see your shop name, so it's going to be harder for them to remember to come back to your table if they did find something interesting. I also like how you have your prints starting from the 3rd grid cube height and then onwards to the 4th grid cube, since they are easier to see than your smaller items, like your keychains and stickers, because I usually advise having your bigger items that don't require you to be in front of your table to see them at a higher grid cube height, since you can see them from a distance, and to attract some passerbys to your table. I also love how your products are very organized and labeled clearly with prices. As I can see here, you have a price menu here. They're all labeled with the charms, and you have your deals available, even just to show that you do have shaker keychains and that you recommend gently shaking them so people know that you can shake them. I also like how you have your mystery bags over here with details above here and below to really fill the space. I think it's brilliant that you have a sign up top right here with all of the available designs. And since you do have extra room, the crate over here are elevated at an appropriate level. And the fact that you also have a sign here showing some of the keychains that they can receive in that mystery bag. Usually if they see a mystery bag and if you don't have the physical product there, which I've experienced with my gachapons, and I've talked about this before, most people are going to assume it's a sticker even though it might be labeled that they're keychains or pins. So having that here and showing, oh, this is what some keychains, or these are some of the keychains that you can receive, kind of makes that a little bit more clear for the attendee interested in that mystery bag. And even having a sign like this big, it's large enough that you can see it from a distance, and they don't necessarily need to be in front of your table to see it. In the form you mentioned that you're looking into building a more unique style with your booth, and I feel like you're already getting to that point, because I have seen a few nature-like or woodsy booth displays, and honestly it's not very common compared to, let's say, mine, which is pink. There's a lot of pink booths, and I say this every time, but there's a lot of pink booths, let's be honest. It's cute and it works. And I feel like it makes sense that you went into that woodsy nature-like direction with your table display, since your OC is a bear, and I think, at least when I think of bears, I can imagine like Smokey Bear, which uses a lot of brown and green tones, which you've definitely hit with your display. And even with your use of that leaf garland really brings that theme together. Given that you've only been tabling since August, you have a pretty solid display. And comparing to the average artist, you may not have a lot of products, but the way your products are displayed just doesn't seem as so. Moving on to Melagurumi. I can definitely see the cohesive branding with the use of blue throughout your display, and even with your products, they work well together. I also love how you have your shop name up top as well as below your display, so whether someone is directly in front of your table or from a distance, they can see your shop name. And I also love how your table sign is very descriptive. Obviously, I see that you have your email, your Etsy, Instagram, socials, and that it also makes it known that you are the artist who crocheted your work, just so all of that important information is right there. And I feel like with this size sign, you can also use it at outdoor night markets, which I feel like, or not necessarily night markets, but any outdoor craft market, which I feel like your products are also well suited for besides Artist Alley. And then you can reuse it to the back of your canopy as like a banner in the background. I don't know, what is that called? I don't know. But you know what I mean. I also love how your price signage is just so very clear and obvious. And even the fact that you have a sign right here, which I feel like just because of the placement and how it creates a shadow just from this grid cube alone, it is a little bit difficult to see. But the fact that it's there is very helpful in explaining why you price your items a certain way, because let's be honest, in terms of Artist Alley, not everyone is going to be dropping $250 for an Appa crochet good, even though I'm pretty sure you priced it reasonably for your effort and the material spent. A lot of people are going to be balking at that huge price tag, and having this price signage and explaining why it's priced that way can give a little bit more insight for people to understand it a little bit more. And even by reassuring people that your products are handmade, it will also help them justify the cost as well. Even though you really shouldn't have to do that, but that's also the way the world works. Sometimes you just have to explain, and in a time where a lot of things can be cheaply manufactured, it's just the way it is, unfortunately. And I also really like how you have a large sign right here with payment methods. So it's very clear you accept Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle. And then the attendee doesn't have to ask if you accept those payment methods. And in your form, you did mention increasing your display height. From what I can see, you're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, technically 6 grid levels high. And honestly, I think you're fine. Though I'm assuming you brought it up because you do have a lot of products and you want to fit even more, especially since you do have a lot of crocheted goods, and crocheted goods tend to take up a lot of space versus something as flat as stickers or keychains. If anything, I'm really impressed that you fit everything, because I feel like if you go past grid 5 here, like, wouldn't they fall off? I don't know. Like, if you have crocheted goods here, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's sturdy and you know that it's sturdy enough for them to hold up to that grid level. I know for a lot of major cons, some of them do have height restrictions, and I know for a con like Anime Expo in particular, I think the display limit is around 7.5, and I know for myself, I can only max up to grid level 5, and anything taller than that would just exceed the height limit. I'm pretty sure it should be fine as long as you're able to secure products up here. I think in that case, I'm just wondering how you would get the inventory from up top unless you have like a tall step ladder, or if it's just for display, though I'm assuming it's not just for display, but then that's also something for you to figure out on your own. But I feel like if the con doesn't have a height limit, you can definitely put some stuff up here. I would just be a little worried about things falling out. And given that this is your display from your first Artist Alley, it's really good. You're really optimizing your space given that you don't have much of it when your goods are bulky, just by taking advantage of height, and attendees can pretty much see everything by walking past it since you have larger looking items. If you didn't know already, Molekena is on Patreon. If you're interested in vending in Artist Alley, the Biz Buddies tier has more detailed Artist Alley reviews and will have priority spots for my YouTube review videos, among other things. If you want to join my Patreon or just support this channel, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below. Next up, we have Piccolin Studios. I like your overall branding. I can tell that you're leaning towards a more floral, nature-like theme, especially with your banners and even in your color scheme, especially with the use of your wood panels and the pricing signage, which is super cute, by the way. I have to point out that I really like how you displayed your tote bags kind of like a clothing rack. And this is definitely a good way to display them if you don't have a lot of space. And I've also seen a lot of other artists do this for some of their other flat items like mouse pads, desk mats, and apparel. And it also allows customers to basically just look through them. And I really like how you have this sign here on the hangers where it just says display only, because I feel like a lot of people might get confused, especially if they're not familiar with how Artist Alley is. Typically, it's not necessarily self-serve, so a lot of it you do have to order at the like front desk, or what is it, like at the with the artist. So having display only basically tells the customer, please don't take out the tote bag and then hand it to me, only for me to give you another tote bag. And people can just leave it on the display and they won't bother it for the most part. I also like how you have signs that signal that you have new items. And I feel like it's great for regulars, because if they have seen your table in a previous event and they see you at another event, they don't necessarily have to scour through your table to see if you do have anything new. this basically shows them these are the new items if you have been looking for something different. I also like how you provided baskets on the side of your display, especially since you do have some self-serve items up front. It does help minimize theft since the items won't be in their hands while they're trying to shop around. Since you do have some empty space right here, I would consider adding a sign with your social media or even like a QR code as a call to action, just so your interactions with a customer does not stop at in-person events, and they can also just keep up with you digitally. So they can also anticipate future events or even shop updates. Other than that, I feel like everything's really great. You have a pretty strong brand and very cohesive style, so I think you're on the right track. Moving on to Starry Hua, I can tell the branding is very cohesive with the pink. I also really like how you have your shop name up on the table, and it also helps to have pronunciation, even though I feel like most people don't really take that into account. At least for me. I think I have I don't know if I have it on my current display, but I know, or in my previous branded logo, I did include pronunciation. I don't think anyone would read it, but I feel like it helps sometimes, at least for the small amount of people who do read how to pronounce it. And I also really like how you have your OCs up top here. I feel like that's something that I've seen a lot more in some Artist Alley displays, and even something that I want to include. Definitely helps get people more familiar with your OCs. I also like how you displayed your PC holders on the grid so people can look at them while having them secured on your table. I think another alternative that I've seen besides wire grid cubes, however, I think it might be slightly more expensive, I'm not sure, are pegboards or even cork boards if you want to basically pin down your PC holders. I feel like wire grids are so accessible that this is the easiest option, especially if you're just starting out. I feel like your display is pretty organized, and I like how you have very clear signage on payment. Like here, you have Venmo very clear, because you'd be surprised at how many people do miss like the Venmo QR code. However, I feel like I can't really blame them just because my table has so much stuff on it, and I only have my QR code, I think, right where there's some free space. And usually I'd have to show it to them, but this is a good option if you do have the display space, and it's just easy to spot if it's way up there. And it's also great that you did take advantage of height, being 4 grid cubes high. I'm assuming it's a 12 by 12 grid cube, because I know there are some like 14 by 14 options. I don't often recommend it because it's a little bit more difficult to plan a 6-foot or 8-foot table with 14 by 14 when you can easily use a 12 by 12 and easily calculate that with a 6 or an 8-foot table. And assuming you do stand with this display, as again, I usually advise that most displays be at least 3 to 4 grid cubes tall if you're using grids. And if you are standing, the average person, typically their head is usually around the 3rd grid cube height. If you're gonna have some signage above you, usually that would go on the 4th grid cube. And if you're sitting, usually your head would be on the 2nd grid cube, so then any signage, if you're sitting at your display, is 3rd grid cube and above. Also, great addition with using tip jars. I think this is a fun way to gamify tips, because some creative ones that I've mentioned in the past are titling the tip jars as your boba fund or potential treats for your cat or whatever pets you have. And I've also seen some people have 2 different anime characters, and people would compete as to which one is their most favorite or who would beat one in a fight. And those are always fun, and this is definitely a good way, especially since you did have the printouts pretty big, so people can easily see them. I'm not quite sure if this table is part of your display. I'm assuming not, just because it's not included in the overall photo. With that being said, I feel like your display is well put together with the inventory that you do have. I'm not sure if this is the same with you, but from my experience, I feel like when I do have some items hanging down here, as I've noticed you do have some keychains up here, they don't always do that well for me. I know in the past when I first had my lanyards, I did have them like hanging from my display without some kind of like grid behind them, and they didn't really do that well. So I feel like having these small items, it might be a little bit easier if you do have them on a grid, just so people can easily see them. Because I would take it, personally, I would take it as decoration, even though it might be pretty obvious that you're selling these keychains. Maybe they are decoration, it's kind of hard to tell, but assuming that you are selling those keychains, I would advise putting them on a separate grid, since you do have the space for them, and it might be easier for people to see them with a solid background, so to say. Next we have Pixamancer. Very cohesive branding with the blue. I do like how you have your shop name very clearly displayed and big enough so anyone walking past doesn't really have to go up to your table to see your shop name. And that you also have your website as well as just a very small description of what your shop is like. I also do like how your products on the first grid cube height are at an angle. And I definitely would have wanted to do something like this when I first started if I didn't need the additional surface area on my table. And for those of you interested in this type of setup, usually you would need a longer sized grid cube and then tie some zip ties up top. But I don't know if you're using like some sort of clip, because I have seen some people use like a very specific clip they can, oh my gosh, that you can attach to your grid. I'm just not quite sure what it is. Or maybe you're using zip ties. I don't know. Again, using zip ties are the more common ways to secure these longer grid cubes to the other grids. And I feel like this method of having this angle on your table also helps prevent people from placing their drinks on your table. And I feel like that's not necessarily an issue typically of Artist Alley. However, for a lot of cup sleeve events or food markets, that's usually the issue. So having this just keeps your table clear and people are less likely to put their drinks on your display. I also like how you hung your tote bags up top here. I feel like it helps for visibility, especially for items this big. I'm assuming you used pipes for these, and I have seen this used in Artist Alley a few times, especially for those who want to have those type of like canopy awnings to help make your booth appear like it's a little shop rather than just a table display. I can imagine that using pipes makes setup and takedown very easy just because all you have to do is connect them, and I feel like it's easy to pack, especially if you are using a suitcase and you're flying everywhere. And I feel like they'll fit better rather than some photo stands. As mentioned previously, this type of rack is another way to display flat items, and in this case, you use it to display your t-shirts. And I also really like how you included this signage to basically show some photos of models wearing the shirt, so then people can also imagine themselves wearing it. I feel like everything is very clean and organized, and I just really love how everything is labeled. Like, it's very clear that you have keychains, jet tags, just in case people aren't familiar with that particular item. I know for me, prior to vending in Artist Alley, I wasn't very familiar with what jet tags were, but I love how it's very clearly labeled. So basically anyone looking at your display is not necessarily questioning what anything is. And I also like how you have a master price list here that is at a reasonable like eye level, so then people can glance at it when they're in front ordering from you at the center of your table. And I feel like having both a master price list as well as individual pricing just helps a lot of attendees, especially at events where it can get very busy. In the case of events like Anime Expo or Fanime, some customers can't just stand in the center of your table and then decide right away that they want to buy certain things, because sometimes people do have to consider their budget and you don't want them spending a lot of time right in front of you debating on if they want like some keychains or stickers and basing it off of price when they could have easily been doing that while they were off to the side waiting for their turn. But instead, they're right here taking up some time when you could be helping another customer. And I feel like having very clear pricing wherever you have space just makes the whole purchase process a lot quicker, and it just goes a lot more smoothly. And I feel like even with a lot of products, I'm assuming this is an 8-foot table because this is a lot of space. And typically if it was an 8-foot table, it would just stop right here. Granted, it might be different if you have a 6-foot table, but for the most part, I feel like it doesn't feel overwhelming. Even when you do have a lot of products, it's very clean and organized, so I wouldn't be too overstimulated if I look at your table. For the most part, I think your table display is really great. And I feel like even with a common brand color such as blue, I can still remember your table and it's very memorable. Moving on to So Craftful. Your display is very cohesive and on brand, and I feel like I say this with a lot of displays, but it still rings true. And I really like how you have your shop name up top and as well on the bottom, so it can be seen from afar, and pink is clearly your brand color. I do have to point out that I really love how you extended your display using your grids up here. So then you're not limited to, I'm assuming is maybe a 6-foot table. So I'm assuming you had an 8-foot space. So in order to extend your display into an 8-foot space, you added some grids here, which I think is great, particularly by using different size grids, as obviously this is not a 12 by 12 grid. I'm not quite sure what the measurements are, but having a mixed size grids, I don't even know if that's grammatically correct, but having a mix of different size grids helps it even out with the table, because obviously if you were to use strictly 12 by 12 grids, I don't think it would even out with the table, since sometimes certain tables are like 2.5 feet tall. So this just makes sure that your display is even throughout and it's not lopsided. I really like how you have your social media and accepted payments right up front, because people then are not wondering if you accept tap or card, and even having your QR code as well as your username and what social media platforms you're on just makes it easier for the customer to find you later on if they want to keep up with you on socials. I also really like how you have this same information over here, so then for people who are possibly like waiting for their turn or are curious about your table but aren't sure if they want to make a purchase, this answers their question if you are able to accept cash or card or tap. And if they do want to follow you on socials, it's also here, and they don't necessarily have to go to the front of your table to see that information. I also really like how it's organized with your larger crocheted items on the right and then your smaller items on the left. And I even noticed this, but I really like how you have, I'm assuming you printed it out and adapted it to your display. And I feel like this definitely helps bring your display a little bit together in terms of branding, because especially now it has been more common to have solid color displays like this one, or not displays, but solid color grids. And having some sort of brand on it just seems a little bit more personalized and more true to your brand, so to say. And I also really like how you have your keychains clearly labeled, so you know like, oh, these are Pride keychains, you have acrylic keychains. And I've mentioned this in previous videos, but if you have a lot of items, especially smaller items, and they don't necessarily have names attached to them, it does help to have these little IDs on it. I don't know the correct term, but just something to help identify that particular product, especially in situations where people don't really know how to describe a certain item, or maybe there's just a lot going on in their head and they don't want to think, how would I describe this? Like the flower keychain. But then what if you had multiple different flower keychains and they don't know the name of the flower? Having an ID like this helps. So then this was labeled like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. The customer can tell the artist, oh, I want keychain 1B. And then the artist or even the helper would know, oh, this is keychain 1B, and they know which keychain they're referring to. And this is also very helpful for helpers, because they may not be necessarily familiar with your work as you are. And having those types of IDs attached to specific products helps them look for that product within your inventory, rather than stressing out like, which one's a Luffy pin? At least in my case, especially if they don't watch One Piece, they may not know the anime character's name. So having these IDs will help them go through a much more smooth transaction and easily find things a lot quickly. I think the only thing I'm a little bit confused about is pricing, at least for your larger items. I'm assuming, since I do see some price tags on a few of the products, I'm assuming that the prices are actually on the hang tags. At least in terms of Artist Alley, it is very helpful to have some visible price tags that are much larger. Like, let's say if I was walking past, and again, you have to note that a lot of people don't have good eyesight, it helps to have some price signage. So let's say, I mean, I don't want to price your items, but if you have like a sign here and it has like the price for like this product and this product, I feel like it's a lot easier, and also prevents customers, unless you're okay with it, I'm assuming, but it also prevents customers from possibly damaging or dirtying your items in the process, since I'm assuming you're going to have them like rummage through them to see what the prices are. Because I'm assuming this is self-serve. I'm not sure if this is not made to order, but I go up to you and tell you like, oh, I want this particular bee, and then you'll get it for me, or I'm not sure if I would get it off from the shelf, but it does help to consider that process just so your products are not damaged, because I can't imagine, I'd be too terrified to be touching this, especially since it's white. I feel like I'd get it dirty, even if I just washed my hands. But other than that, I feel like your display is very inviting and very appealing to someone who would be interested in crocheted goods. Next up, we have DioDoodle. I love your use of height, even with not a lot of product inventory. I always recommend, as I always say, having a display at least like 3 to 4 grid cubes tall, which is about, again, like 4 feet off the table. While I do repeat that every time, there is a reason as to why I keep saying that. And it's mainly because you're competing with a lot of artists who may be more established and have the inventory to fill out a table. So the best way to compete, especially when you are new to Artist Alley and don't have a lot of product, is to have a tall enough display besides having good quality products and work. I also really like how you have this table runner. I think it's a nice touch, and I also really like how you included these lights, and I feel like it's a great way to decorate your display as well. I've seen other people use garlands, or even in the past I used to use like a cherry blossom garland, which was nice, and I've also seen some people use leaf garlands. I also really like how you have a price menu off to the side of your display. I feel like it's good for easy reference, and even a sign here off to the side that has your accepted payments, so people don't need to ask you if you accept Venmo or PayPal. And going back to the price menu, if you're new to Artist Alley, having a whiteboard is a really good option if you're just starting, because you can easily change the prices or add deals when necessary. And it's also not that expensive versus printing out a sign every single time you do a con, because I'm pretty sure prices are gonna change and you might have new products, and that's already pretty expensive if you keep printing new things out. But with a whiteboard, it allows you to adjust whenever it's needed. And I've also seen some artists use those like letter felt boards as another alternative. I did notice that you do have some items here that are lying flat on the table. I think my only suggestion is to have them elevated somehow, just so attendees can see them when walking past your table. I feel like some cost-effective ways of doing that is to use some boxes that you have lying around, just so they are propped up at an angle, or at least partially vertical, and then possibly leave one of these flat on the table so attendees do know how it could be used. And I feel like for these as well, I'm not quite sure if they're pins, but you can have them on this grid cube, for example, so then people can see it from a distance. I also recommend having your shop name somewhere on your display. It doesn't necessarily need to be on a banner, especially if you're new, but I would recommend even drawing one or just printing one out so that it fits on a grid cube. And I feel like you can put it somewhere here just to keep it even, or if you really wanted to, you can also put it here, but I feel like here is fine. Just so people can remember your shop name if they do want to return to your table or at least follow you on socials, besides having your shop name up here. But it is on the smaller side, so having a sign up here will just make it easier for them, especially if they do take a photo of your display for future reference. I feel like as time goes on and you do more conventions or even events, you're going to figure out what works best for your display, but I feel like you're going in the right direction. Moving on to 100% Fruity. I really love how colorful your display is. I can tell that your branding is meant to be very fun and colorful, and I really like how you present your shop name up here. And I feel like this is definitely a good example of another way to include your shop name on your table if you don't want to purchase a banner, let's say. This is definitely like a more fun and more creative way of going about that, especially since it's not very common, and it also helps you stand out. And I feel like having these party banner flags, or it adds a little bit more fun to your display. I also really like how you extended your table off to the sides with these grid cubes. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but some cons do allow you to bring an extra table to form an L shape, or just have more space to display your items on your table by bringing in an extra table, especially if you do have a corner spot. And granted, not everyone can just bring a table, especially if you flew in. So using grid cubes is a great way to extend your table and your display past the typical like 6 or 8 foot table space. And I also really like how everything is elevated as noted. I'm not quite sure if these are canvases or postcards, but I noticed that most of your items on your table are at an angle, so anyone walking past can see it and it's not necessarily flat on the table. And I did notice that there are a couple products that are flat on the table, like these, like postcards. But since you do have a lot of items on your table already, and most of them are elevated, it could possibly be counterproductive for them to also be elevated, because then you could potentially be blocking these items. So in that case, I think it's fine to have them flat, especially if it's not necessarily your priority. However, in the future, you can consider adding another grid to possibly have these prints pinned up here, or you can invest in those like card racks, so then all of your products could be elevated partially and they're all kind of like staggered in terms of display. And in that case, you can also even elevate your display further, so then you can accommodate for more products. I feel like 5 grid cubes high, as again mentioned, it is typically the max for a lot of conventions and events. And I'm assuming, because this is 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm assuming this is 4 grid cubes high, and having your shop name up here is going to be the 5th grid cube height. So possibly you might not be able to go at a taller height. However, you can always go wider by even extending the grids this way and then have some products here, or even on this side, just to have more surface area for displaying your products. I also really like how everything is labeled very clearly and how you use these, I don't know if they're post-it notes. Yeah, they are post-it notes. Like, you have these sticky notes displaying prices for each of your products, and even with the type of sticky notes with these neon colors and fun shapes definitely adds to your brand with its fun and colorful theme. If I do have to point something out, I would have to say that because these, I think, are they pins? Or like, these pins slash charms are on the smaller side. And while it is easier to have these displayed on wire grids, because again, wire grids do allow a keychain to attach on them, it is a little bit difficult to spot just because there isn't a solid background or a solid color behind these to help them stand out. As, like, let's say with these cork boards, this is a good example actually. For these, it's a lot easier to see the keychains because it does have a solid background, versus them being on the wire grid cubes. It's a little bit more difficult to see the details. And in this case, I would recommend either putting these on a cork board like this, or just having some kind of background, whether you're using like cardstock paper, even just getting one of those like plastic grid cubes and having it there so then you can see the details in the keychains. On my display, I do have my shaker keychains on a wire grid. However, they are 4 inches, so they are less likely to get lost in the background versus smaller keychains like these. And you also mentioned that you are 2 artists who table together. I'm not quite sure if you're working as a studio, and then, I mean, I've never been in a studio, so I don't really know too much about it, but I'm not sure if you're working as a studio where under that studio name, you're sharing different artworks as one entity, or you're dividing the table in 2, but your studio name is 100% Fruity. I feel like if you're in the former position, you're fine since it's clear that you're under one studio. However, if you're in the latter, I would suggest having something in your display that would make it clear that it's 2 different artists with 2 different works. Because I do have friends who split tables, and typically they have different color displays. Like, for one particular artist is pink and then the other one is purple, and I feel like it's more obvious to customers that it's 2 different shops who happen to share a table rather than one shop. And it just makes it more obvious for customers overall in that case. But overall, I feel like your table looks really good. Next up, we have Lay Spirit Designs. And I have to say, when you first revealed your new table display, I love the concept. I love how it's designed to look like a brick and mortar shop with the rigid boards acting as the brick exterior. And I also love how you have this community bulletin board off to the side. I think it's a creative way to display where people can find you, whether that's socials, YouTube, or Patreon. And I absolutely love this hanging sign. I've actually always wanted to incorporate this onto my display even before I started vending back in like 2022. I just didn't know how to do that with my current display right now. And I feel like it especially helps customers who are walking past your booth but didn't really get a chance to look at your display here directly. If they're walking past and they're looking forward, they're more likely to see this and I feel like that helps a lot, especially at a busy convention. I can definitely see this type of sign being the next big artist alley display thing that a lot of people start to do. I think my only concern is that some conventions might not allow displays going past the front of your table. I can't remember if Anime Expo's like that, but for the most part, those types of cons aren't that common, especially since this is high above. So I think if people are like around like the 3rd grid cube height, it shouldn't be a problem, but that is something to consider for more strict cons. I did refer to an awning at some point in the video. This is an example of what an awning would look like. And I also really like how you added light underneath this awning slash canopy, because that's usually my concern for these types of displays, because it is closed off from light from above, and especially with your display being more solid on the sides, it also doesn't allow for light coming in from the sides, and having a light up here basically solves that problem. I also really like the branded tablecloth. I've always wanted to go in that direction versus a table runner. Just a little reminder for people who don't know what a table runner is. It's like that branded fabric that goes over your tablecloth, and it's usually around that size. But another common one is a branded tablecloth where it's basically printed on the entire tablecloth. I think the reason why I didn't go with a whole branded tablecloth is because I often find myself worried that I'm going to rebrand and that I'm going to have to purchase another tablecloth. However, I feel like that's the same process with getting a new table runner, and it's just at a lower cost, but it's really not that big of a deal. I feel like in the future, if I do want to expand or if I do more conventions, I might go with a new tablecloth, but I'm okay with my table runner right now. But this is very tempting. This is super cute. But I feel like in your case, a branded tablecloth is in the right direction, because this definitely makes it feel more like an actual storefront and not necessarily an artist alley table. I also really like how your self-serve display is set up. I feel like it allows you to be able to keep an eye out on your products being within your peripheral vision, since I'm assuming like you're standing here. It allows you to keep an eye out on things. And even the shopping basket is a nice touch, since it not only, again, helps customers hold the items they want to purchase, but it also helps you keep track of where everything is, since you do have a lot of smaller items with the pins and stickers, and you're more able to make sure that no one is sneaking it in their like jacket sleeve or something. You'd be surprised. I also really like how you have very clear signage on basically everything, and it's very on brand. I feel like it makes it look a little bit more professional, having everything so cohesive and clear and obvious. Especially if a shy customer does come up to your table, they don't have to say or ask anything. They already know how much a sticker book costs or if you have deals on it, and they can honestly, especially with a self-serve model, they can just hand you the item and then make a purchase without saying anything, really. And as for displaying your products, again, great job on not making anything flat on the table. This is a good example of having everything pretty visible by using, I don't even know what these are called. I don't use them, but just having something like stacked up on each other so they're still visible, but not necessarily covering the other item in front of it or behind it. And everything is just raised up in some way, whether it's, again, with these stands or these baskets. And I feel like everything has its own specific space and is very organized. So overall, love the display. You know how I feel about it. This is like the display of my dreams. If I didn't have so many large products, which I have nothing against large products, obviously it helps me pay my bills, but I can definitely see this becoming more of a thing in Artist Alley, to be honest. Especially since Artist Alley is so big right now. A lot of people are putting in a lot of effort into their displays, and there's just so many creative ways of displaying your products, and I'm all here for it. With con season starting up, this should give you some more ideas on how you might want to design your Artist Alley table. Whether you're new in Artist Alley or you're a seasoned veteran, we all make mistakes. So if you're interested in learning from my mistakes so you don't make them yourself, make sure you watch this video to learn what I would do if I could start over in Artist Alley.